Hiphil. Let us now turn to the Hiphil binyan. Here's our chart. Now, the Hiphil is a very important binyan. If you go back to the section where I talked about strategies for learning Hebrew verbs, I suggested at that point that obviously cal is important because everything builds on cal. You need to know that like your signature, every single dot, or at least if you do, it will benefit you for all the other paradigms. Put it that way. Rather than saying you must know, I'm telling you, if you know the cal and you know it well, it will pay dividends. The other three binyan that are really quite important, really very important, are the nifal, the pl, and the hiphil. The pual is not quite so critical because it's so similar to the pl. If you know the pl, you know the pual. It's just some vowel changes. Hitpile is very recognizable, and hofal, as we'll see, is the passive of the hiphil, and again, mostly vowel changes. But the hiphil is the other big paradigm that we have to learn, and it's not that easy. It's a bit more like the nifal in terms of its complexity. Okay, let's look, and before we go into the details, let's see what we can observe just by looking at this chart. If we start with the name, we see Hiphil. We expect to see a hey, right? Well, we see a hey here in the perfect all the way down. So Hiphil, obviously in this one, because this is what the name is based on, or Hifkid, but if you use Pa'al, it would be Hiphil. And we see the hey here. Okay. Now we don't see it here. It's not here anywhere. And these are the prefix forms, right? So you expect it to be gone, but unlike the nifal in the prefix form, the nifal assimilated and became a dagesh forte. We don't see a dagesh forte here either. So what happened to the hey? That's a question we'll have to address. Next thing along here, we see an I. Well, we have our I here, hidik, all the way down here. But in these forms, we have a patach. Look at that, all the way down. And here too, patach, patach. Everywhere is a patach, except for the perfect. Now, what have we seen for prefix vowels before? In the cal, well, first of all, the one that stands out, the vocal shava is what? Vocal shava prefix vowel marks the pl and pual, okay? And then the cal and the nifal and the hitpile, they all have hidik. So these are the prefix vowels we've seen to date. It's the first time we have seen a patach mark the prefix vowel. And this will be an important marker. Maybe, it's hard to say the single most important marker of the Hiphil, but certainly an important one. And you see how many forms it affects, right? All these here. The hey only shows up here, and we have other forms with hey too. Like the nifal imperative has a hey, so we have to look for the vowels to start to distinguish these things. So we looked at the hey, we've looked at our first vowel, Hiphil, and the other feature of the name here is this vowel, the last one, Hiphil. So we see it here. So our theme vowel here is a hidik yud, which is interesting because we have a mater there. We haven't seen that before. In the cal, it was pakad, so we had a patach there. In the pl, it was a tzere, right? What we'll see in the Hiphil is that we have IE vowels here. So we have a hidik yud here and here. Here it's lost. Interesting. I have to talk about that. It's back again here, and it's lost here. But all through the rest of these here, you have hidik yud, hidik yud, hidik yud, all the way through tzere, hidik yud, tzere, hidik yud. And that'll be the case for all these as well. You have an I or an E vowel, either hidik yud or tzere. So that will also be important. Our hey is important, and our first vowel, hidik, or this patach, and the IE vowel at the end. Those are key features for the Hiphil. Okay, now I'm going to repeat myself as I go and look at the details here. Okay, I've divided these into two. This division is like the hitpile division, and unlike the nifal division. Remember, with the nifal, we had the perfect and the participle as one set, because those are the ones where you saw the nun. And all the other ones, all these ones here in the Hiphil, was where the nun assimilated, and it became a Dagesh forte in the first root letter, in the first radical. This division is like the Hiphil, and for the same reason. The Hiphil had hit in all these, and had hit here as well, because it had this hey. These are the forms where you either do not have a prefix, didn't mean to put a mark on there. The perfect doesn't have a prefix, so it had the hey with the tav infix and the tav infix in the Hiphil, and these ones are where the prefix gets stripped off, so it had the hey as well. And in the Hiphil, we see the same behavior. We have a hey in all the perfects, and we have a hey in the imperatives and in the infinitives. And then these ones here, there's no hey. Hey is gone. So, one of the characteristics, I've labeled these as two separate major characteristics for the Hiphil. The first one is the prefix hey. And we see that in the perfect, the imperative, and the infinitives, the hey is there. That's simply this, the perfect, the imperatives, and the infinitives. By the way, the reason I show you the picture first, and then I show you the text, is that for me anyway, it's easier to recognize things spatially. So I look at this and say, okay, perfect, imperative, and infinitives. I know what those are. I can see them. I can see the map. If I read this text, it's like perfect, imperative, infinitives. Okay, what are they now? How do I distinguish this? So that's why I show the picture first. I can talk about it, and then we'll move on to the text and then flip back to the picture. If you wondered why I was doing things in what may seem like a backwards order, that's why. Okay, so back to the lesson here. Perfect, these ones here, perfect, imperative, and infinitives have the hey, I just said that. And the other ones, the hey is absent. And this is unlike the Hiphil, which I just explained. The Hiphil divides differently. What happens here is that the hey gets squeezed out, just like with the Hiphil. With the Hiphil nun gets squeezed out when you have a prefix. But with the Hiphil nun, it actually assimilates into the first radical. With the hey, it simply drops out. You don't have it at all. The other thing that's different with the Hiphil is that you do see the Dagesh forte in the prefix forms when the prefix is dropped out. You do see a Dagesh forte here because you have that hey. Let me just check that. Hiphil, hipakade, imperative. You do see it. And here you don't see you see this hey, like you see it here. Okay, so it's a little bit different than the Hiphil. The division is different, the groupings for the divisions, and the fact that you don't have a Dagesh forte. You don't have assimilation with a Hiphil. It just drops out. Okay, now I've divided it this way. The perfect versus everything else. And the difference here is that these are the ones that have the a vowel, the patach. The patach for your prefix, everywhere. All these here. And the perfect has the hiddic. So that's another major division. This is the division that's different than the other one, right? And the way this is often labeled, and the way I'm labeling it here, is the distinctive vocalization, which is the second characteristic of the Hiphil, is A-class prefix vowel plus I-class theme vowel. That translates as patach plus hiddic yud or tzere. And it's true for all forms except for the perfect. So A-class prefix vowel, I-class theme vowel. Now the A-class is always patach, but the I-class can be hiddic yud, or if we go down here, it can be tzere. Okay? But this here, this is, I would say this characteristic is actually more important than the hey. Hey is also a characteristic of Hiphil, but it shows up here. You see it there. It shows up here, but the hey itself does not distinguish this from the Hiphil. The A class plus I class is the more important feature for the Hiphil. It's the one that's going to help you the most. And I'm going to refer to this here, and I'm going to write it this way. an awful lot when we get to the weak vowels, or the weak verbs. I'll show this again and again, so this is important to remember. Okay, let's look at the perfect a little more. What's going on with the perfect? Prefix he, prefix vowel, prefix consonant he, and prefix vowel hidik. Okay, he and hidik, straight from the name. Prefix does not have the characteristic patach. All the other forms do. Okay, well, I already said that. The prefix, you've got a patach here in all these. This is the one where you have the hidik. What else can we say? Well, we see a difference here between the third forms and the others. So what's the difference? It's in the theme vowel, right? Hidik yud, hidik yud, hidik yud. Theme vowel is hidik yud in the third person. Okay? Hidik yud, which is what you see in most of these forms here. And then what about the non-third person forms? What do we see there? We see a patach. Okay. So what we have here is a second person switch. Remember I talked about this in the PL? The PL had a theme vowel tsere, and then in this form and this form it was reduced because of vocalic ending. The hidik yud, by the way, is not reduced. It's got a mater in there. It's too big to reduce, I guess. But in the PL I talked about second person switch. When you went from third to second person, then your vowel, theme vowel changed from tsere to patach. And we have that in the Hiphil as well. So theme vowel is patach in the second and first person. That's these bright red ones here. Theme vowel is patach. I call this a second person switch. This is just my own name because that's how I tend to think of it. I'm running down the paradigm and I got a switch at the second person. It carries over in the first person as well. So it's really second and first person, but the switch happens here at second person. And then when you're back at third, you're back to this pattern, hidik yud, and then second person switch again. And it's a feature of the perfect. You don't have second person switch here. And remember I said in the PL that the reason it's a second person switch is because these are the forms that happen to have consonantal endings. Okay? Consonant vowel, consonant, well, very short vowel, consonant vowel, consonant vowel consonant, consonant vowel consonant, so CVC, heavy ending, consonant vowel. So when you have these consonants on there, it changes things. And it happens to group this way. Now we will notice, or we will see, that this is true in all Hiphils, throughout all the weak verbs. We'll always see a second person switch in the perfect. And we'll also see it in these particular weak verbs, in three hays, all the three hays, not just Hiphil, in the hollow verbs except Hiphil and the geminate verbs. We'll come back to this. Don't worry about this right now. But I just want to flag the fact that we're going to see this second person switch in more verbs to come. So it's a useful feature. Let me also say that when we learn the weak verbs, what I suggested in my strategy for learning verbs is that you learn the principal parts. Now the principal parts are the first verb for each of these paradigms. So this one, and then this one, and this one, just this one, this one. Of course, these only have one, so you just learn whatever's there. If you only learn the principal parts, you won't run into the second person switch. You won't be aware of that. So when we get into some of those later weak verbs, it's useful to throw in this verb as well, just so that you're aware of what the changes are, because it can be quite significant. But we'll come to that in chapter 32 onwards. Okay, so the vowel is the patach, theme vowel is patach in this second and first person. So much for the perfect. Let's move on to the imperfect and some of the, well, these are the forms where the he doesn't exist, right? He gets squeezed out because you got a prefix, prefix mame, or your imperfect prefixes which show up here as well. Here the prefix is stripped off, okay? So in these forms, the he drops, like I said, it doesn't assimilate. In the nifal, it would assimilate and you'd see a dot there. In the Hiphil, it drops. And you have the A-class prefix vowel, I-class theme vowel distinctive vocalization. So A-class theme vowel, A-class prefix vowel, I-class theme vowel. Hidik Yud, down here you have A-class prefix vowel and I-class, the tzere in this case, as opposed to Hidik Yud, theme vowel. That's true for all these here. Very important marker of the Hiphil. Okay, what I've highlighted here are the ones that have tzere. So it's Hidik Yud everywhere. That's sort of the main I-class vowel that is used. But then sometimes it's reduced. I don't know why. Here you have it tzere when you add these big endings. Maybe you add a big ending needs to reduce. I don't know. These are shortened forms. So far, in all the other binyan we've seen, the kal, nifal, pl, pual, hitpal, when you add a vav consecutive, you make a preterite out of an imperfect. I realize that's not what's happening historically, but when you write it, you can take the imperfect form and you add this to it. When you do that, you add the dot, but nothing else changes for all these other binyan. In the Hiphil, you have reduction. The vowel changes. See that there? Hidik Yud becomes tzere. So you have reduced form, shortened. And we'll see this with other weak verbs as well. But in the strong paradigm, strong verbs, it's just the Hiphil that does this. And also the jussive. The jussive is not identical to the imperfect. Again, it's the Hidik Yud that changes to a tzere. It's a reduced form. So that's why we have tzere there. Why we have tzere here, I don't know. Okay, that's all I'm saying here. Hidik Yud in most forms, but tzere in the forms I mentioned. If you want to read it, it's right here, but otherwise it's these forms. The heavy endings and the preterite and the jussive. Note that the chordative stays with the full IE, the Hidik Yud. Okay, now let's move on to the imperatives and the infinitives. These are the ones with the hey. They have the hey, all of them do, so they're like the perfect in that sense. They have the A-class vowel, so they're like all these ones. So in some ways they're like the perfect with the hey. In another way, they're like all the rest of these verbs in that they have the A-class vowel. A-class plus I-class. A-class prefix plus I-class theme vowel. I'm sure that's all I'm going to say here. Prefix hey, like the perfect. A-class prefix vowel plus I-class theme vowel, like the non-perfects. Okay, and here I'm again noting which ones have the tzere. This is just something to memorize. I don't know why it is this way. Here you have tzere, and here, and the infinitive absolute. Note that the only difference between the infinitive absolute and the infinitive construct is the theme vowel. Hidik Yud marks infinitive construct. Tzere marks the infinitive absolute. Maybe one way to remember that is if you look at your chart in your book or your photocopied version or whatever, on page 544 of Ross, you look at the very bottom at the infinitive absolutes, you'll note that the theme vowel is holem vav, holem or holem vav, for the kal, the nefal, the pl, the pual. So the first four, all of holem vav. The hitpal has a tzere. Ross, in the version of my book, has a version there with holem. I think that's actually an error. I have it crossed out in mine. So tzere for the hitpal, tzere for the Hiphil, and tzere for the hofal. So if you can remember that the infinitive absolute is marked, in terms of theme vowel, by either a holem vav, or holem if the vav is missing, or a tzere. So the first four paradigms, or five paradigms, or binyan, is holem vav, and the last three are tzere. If you can remember that, then you know that, okay, infinitive construct is the other one. I don't know if that's useful to you or not, but well, I'll leave that there actually. Now, really what you want to do with these paradigms, especially the nifal, the pl, and the Hiphil, is get a pad of paper and write these things out. You can write them out in the structure that I have here, or just write them in a list or whatever. But it's worthwhile to do that. Do a couple like that with the pual, the Hiphil, and the Hiphil as well. But especially do this a few times for the Nephil, the PL, and the Hiphil. And of course the Cal. The Cal you have to know well. It doesn't take that long, and it'll help you. So, Hittite and Sere. Just noting which ones they are here. So, Hittite for these and Sere for those. Note also these two are the same. Hafkade, Hafkade. So the imperative and the infinitive absolute are the same here. Often it's these two. If they are the same, it's these two that are the same, infinitive construct and imperative. Here we have the infinitive absolute and the imperative. So, interesting. Identical forms. So right at the end here, imperfect and jussive are not the same. So I'm just noting, I'll go here, that, see, I don't have these highlighted in yellow. In all the other binyans so far, I had this one and this one highlighted as yellow because they were the same. In the Hiphil, like I said, these two forms are reduced. They're shortened. So this is shortened. Hittite becomes Sere, and Hittite becomes Sere. So that's unique. Unique to the Hiphil and the strong verbs. And I just mentioned that it's the imperative and the infinitive absolute that are the same in terms of their forms, not the infinitive construct, like in some other binyan. And that's it. So there you have the morphology of the Hiphil.